I'd like to say welcome. Chris Anderson, Carol Berry, and Carl Buchholz are all members of a climate action group called Earth Matters. It was formed 4 years ago to do whatever is possible on a local level to address the climate crisis. Members of Earth Matters have been learning about and practicing regenerative agriculture, which is both a way of growing healthier food and a way to store carbon in the soil to reduce global warming. One basic component of regenerative agriculture is growing food without the use of chemical fertilizers or pesticides. In the course of their research, our presenters learned that a powerful herbicide called glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, was the most widely used pesticide in the US and around the globe. This trio has been helping to educate about the dangers that glyphosate poses to the soil, to the water, to insects, birds, other animals, peoples, and the planet. So before they begin, we'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Steve Berry and our sponsor, Global Meeting House, for keeping SolarFest vibrant and growing. Global Meeting House is an innovative initiative that connects people together locally and globally in an unrelenting quest to serve the common good. The objective of Global Meeting House is to build upon the human interests and natural aptitude to network, helping people solve systemic problems by offering opportunities to share ideas, develop plans, offer success stories that can make a positive societal impact. So, as our distinguished panel begins, please enter any questions or comments you have into the chat, the button at the bottom of the screen. And at the end of the presentation, we hope to have time to address those issues. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Chris, Carol, and Carl. And thank you for being at SolarFest.
Okay, Carol.
All right, we're getting there. All right. Healthy soil, healthy food, healthy people. This is a presentation to inform and share concerns about the use of toxic chemicals, pesticides, in the environment, in our communities, and in food production. We hope that with greater awareness of the harmful effects that toxic chemicals have, we can all become advocates for healthier alternatives in land management and food production. There are 3 parts to this presentation. My name is Carol Berry, and I will give a general overview. Then Chris will talk about the history of glyphosate or glyphosate, and explain the impact of it on soil health and how it diminishes the nutritional value of our food crops. And then Carl will talk about how glyphosate residues in our food impact human health. Seeing our food crops being sprayed with chemical solutions by people wearing hazmat suits can't but make us wonder what potential hazards we are exposed to and what is happening in our agriculture and in our food production. Although the United States is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, the number of people who suffer from all kinds of diseases is rising, especially autoimmune diseases, from which 1 in 5 people in the United States suffer. There is a lot of research being done about the implications that our health is being compromised by the presence of toxic chemicals, for example, glyphosate containing herbicides, in our environment and in our food supply.
Having a little problem advancing the slides here.
Sometimes.
Hang with us here for a second, folks.
Why don't you go out and start again?
Yeah, this happened once.
Sorry.
It's a little complicated.
All right, that is the next slide. Good. So first of all, oh, go back.
I'm trying to get rid of
Okay,
the
here we go.
box in the middle here.
Yeah, so first of all, a pesticide,
Sorry, hang on a second, Carol.
herbicides,
You can't see the cursor.
fungicides, and insecticides. I'll just talk about that slide. That's not there. And these pesticides are made up of formulations, and that's important to know. There are active ingredients, and which are the chemicals that destroy the target organisms. And the active ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. And then there are the so-called inert ingredients, chemicals which make the absorption of the active ingredient possible. In the case of Roundup, the inert ingredients break down the cell walls of plants and add to the toxicity of pesticides. Then you have the contaminants and impurities, and they are often part of the pesticide product and responsible also for hazards. And then the metabolites, they're often more hazardous than the active ingredients. So this is all important to know. This presentation, we will actually focus on glyphosate, the Roundup ingredient, which is the most widely used herbicide in the world. This presentation is given not only to create an awareness of the harm glyphosate and other pesticides pose, but to also offer ways to become actively engaged and empowered to make changes. But we can only do this by being informed. At the end of the presentation, we will show you a list of organizations that offer a lot of information as well as solutions and alternatives to making healthier choices in land management and food production and consumption. So what you're seeing here on the screen is an example of a fact sheet that contains information about several pesticides that are currently being used and are most common. And such information comes very readily through the organization called Beyond Pesticides. And with such information, we really can become much more effective to advocate for a healthier environment. These numbers will give you some information about the scope of the use of glyphosate in the United States. Between the first application of glyphosate in 1974 until 2014, there is a 200-fold increase. And in Vermont, the usage of glyphosate increased by 10,000 pounds in 5 years. And on the graph, you can see on the right there, that using Roundup occurred especially after Monsanto's Roundup Ready soy, corn, and cotton seeds became available. And we'll hear a bit more about that. Glyphosate containing herbicides are also sprayed on a range of fruits, nuts, and vegetables. The soil is pre-treated with glyphosate before planting certain crops like spinach, for example. In California alone, in 2012, Roundup was sprayed on approximately 5 million acres for all kinds of crops. In addition, glyphosate containing herbicides are being sprayed on fields, around our utility poles, along highways and railways, in forestry, on lawn care, on golf courses. We almost can't escape glyphosate-treated areas. And to make things worse, glyphosate is also harming the beneficial insects like our pollinators. Another disconcerting fact is that glyphosate-containing herbicides are additionally used as pre-harvest treatments to desiccate, meaning to speed up the drying of wheat, oats, barley, and potato crops. This helps the farmers harvest their crops more efficiently and at less cost. But spraying glyphosate right before harvest means that food directly absorbs the glyphosate residues. And that means you cannot wash it off. Think about that. In Vermont in 2018, there were still about 280 different pesticides listed on the website of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. Many have not been fully tested for safety. The overall pesticide use in Vermont is high. As you can see, it doubled in 5 years. With the overuse of pesticides in general, the fertility of crop soil is being depleted. And this is what Chris will be talking about. And this results in producing crops that have a lower nutritional content. In addition, a depleted soil is less able to sequester carbon, which has a major impact on climate change. And the overuse of glyphosate specifically has created a huge problem because the target weeds have developed a resistance to the toxins and are becoming so-called superweeds. And that is why a whole new arsenal of other potent pesticides are being introduced to combat these superweeds. Here's a listing of some of the other pesticides to be aware of. 2,4-D, as you can see, is an ingredient that was used in Agent Orange, and it is used on lawns and in corn and so on. And then you have dicamba, that has been in the news because of its tendency to drift and affect neighboring fields. And then atrazine, which is used on fields and is seeping into wells and is one of the most commonly and most used pesticides in Vermont. In Europe, it is banned. And then you have chlorpyrifos. We've also heard about that in the news. It is a neurotoxin. It harms the development of children's brains. And conventionally grown apples, peppers, oranges, grapes, and cherries are found to contain chlorpyrifos residues. It also kills pollinators. All of these chemicals are harming us. Before Roundup and these other pesticides became widely used, there was the insecticide DDT, originally used in the 1940s to kill insects that carried diseases. DDT pesticides were used in farming, home gardens, and forests. And as you can see, the slogan, DDT is good for me, it is as safe as table salt, coined by the manufacturers, informed us that this toxin was considered to be safe. But today we know DDT is a human carcinogen and very detrimental to the environment. It was banned in 1972, but residues are still found in the environment 50 years later. And it was Rachel Carson's book called Silent Spring that drew attention to the indiscriminate use of pesticides and the harmful effects, especially of DDT, and its pervasiveness in the environment and in human bodies. She called for humans to act more responsibly and carefully and as stewards of the living earth. And one of the statements at the end of the book is a powerful one. She says that there is no safe amount for the use of any chemical toxin in our environment because of the accumulative effect from every drop or spray applied, and because nature's balance is destroyed when unnatural toxins interfere. In the 1990s, a familiar slogan was perpetuated by the manufacturers of Roundup, Monsanto. They said Roundup is safer than table salt and practically non-toxic to mammals, birds, and fish. We were also told that it is environmentally friendly and biodegradable. And since most of us are not chemists, we could only believe and hope and trust this was true, just like with DDT in the beginning. Chris and Carl will talk about the fact that glyphosate is not environmentally friendly and not non-toxic to mammals and humans. And Roundup is available in most stores that sell gardening products. But glyphosate isn't only found in Roundup, so we have to remember that too. It is registered to be used in hundreds of other products. All over the world, agencies are grappling with issues of safety when it comes to toxic pesticides and the amount of them applied in food and water. And there are many different opinions and regulations. Here you have an example from the year 2017 of what was considered the safe average daily intake for glyphosate in food, and then the maximum residue level of glyphosate in drinking water in the European Union and in the United States. And based on these numbers, we in the United States have been and are exposed to 3.5 times more glyphosate in our food and 7,000 times more residue of glyphosate in our water than people in the European Union. So this is one of the reasons why so many people suffer with health issues. And these kinds of statistics should make us question and become engaged with the pesticide regulations in our country. And remember, as I said before, formulations such as Roundup are more toxic than the glyphosate alone due to the added ingredients. And this increase in toxicity needs to be taken into account. And what equally needs to be taken into account is that, as you saw on the previous slide, pesticides such as glyphosate and Roundup are not the only toxic synthetic pesticides we're exposed to. In addition to what I already mentioned, we are also exposed to other kinds of chemicals and preservatives that are mixed into our processed foods. So all these substances accumulate in our bodies and have synergistic effects. That is, when several substances are combined, they react with each other and in our bodies enhance the toxic overload. There is good news. For more and more, we do read about investigations and new rulings regarding pesticides. As you can see, countries all over the world are banning and planning on restricting glyphosate. It was a huge win for Mexican farmers when the president issued a decree that should phase out the use of glyphosate and genetically modified corn in the country by 2024. And as of 2018, I have a listing here of cities or counties in these states that have restrictions in place or have banned glyphosate outright. New York State is planning on banning glyphosate on state-owned lands by the end of the year. And in Vermont, there are bills that have been introduced to ban the sale or application of glyphosate and atrazine. So we hope that instead of these lawn signs, to see such a sign, we can all advocate for an organic and regenerative approach to agriculture and land management, so that we will have healthier soil, which will grow healthier and more resilient plants, which in turn will be nutritious and healthy for us all. I now turn this presentation over to Chris, who will take you through the history of glyphosate and how it affects our soil.
Thanks, Carol. Well, let's look a little bit first at the science. Glyphosate, the molecule, contains the elements carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. Its chemical name is nitrogen phosphonylmethylglycine. The best known product that contains glyphosate is Roundup, the herbicide manufactured by Monsanto, which is now owned by the Bayer Corporation. But many other companies have developed and are marketing their own glyphosate herbicides. And those products have names like Rodeo, Pronto, Cleanup, and Eraser. Glyphosate was first synthesized by the Stauffer Company in 1961, and it was discovered to be a chelator, a descaling agent. And in 1964, Monsanto began selling glyphosate as a chelator to remove elements like calcium and iron from boilers and water pipes. In 1970, Monsanto discovered that glyphosate is also an herbicide that kills both grasses and broadleaf plants. The plant dies when it's sprayed with glyphosate because the glyphosate disrupts a biochemical pathway, the shikimate pathway. Without this pathway, the plant cannot create or manufacture essential proteins that it needs for growth. So glyphosate is starving the plant. Both plants and microorganisms have the shikimate pathway, but animals, including humans, do not. And for this reason, Monsanto claimed that glyphosate could not harm people. It took a few years for Monsanto to perfect its secret formula with glyphosate. And so Roundup first came on the market in 1974. And as Carol mentioned, Roundup has many other chemicals added to it to help the active ingredient glyphosate do its job. Much of the research done on the safety of glyphosate has been done with glyphosate alone and has not included the many so-called inert ingredients in the glyphosate herbicide products. In 1996, Monsanto released their first Roundup Ready seeds, soybeans. And these seeds have been genetically engineered or modified. After soybeans, Monsanto genetically engineered corn, canola, sugar beets, cotton, and alfalfa to be Roundup Ready. The plants that grow from these seeds are genetically altered so that glyphosate will not kill them. So when glyphosate is sprayed on a field of corn or cotton, for example, it will not kill the corn or cotton. It will only kill the weeds that are growing in the field. Unfortunately, many weeds have quickly become resistant to glyphosate. So now farmers are using additional herbicides, which kill the glyphosate-resistant weeds using different mechanisms. So Monsanto has genetically engineered the seeds further so that the crops will be resistant to these other herbicides and to various insecticides, as well as to the glyphosate. This US map shows the use of glyphosate in 1996, before the Roundup Ready seeds were introduced. The yellow areas indicate lower use of glyphosate, darkening to brown in the areas of higher use, such as in California. 21 years later, in 2017, with Roundup Ready seeds in wide use, the dark areas have greatly increased where glyphosate is being used much more heavily. According to the Food and Drug Administration, in 2018, 94% of soybeans, 94% of cotton, and 92% of the corn grown in the United States is grown with glyphosate. Finally, in 2010, Monsanto was granted another patent for glyphosate as an antibiotic. Glyphosate kills bacteria and fungi. It kills microorganisms. That is 3 patents for glyphosate: a chelator, an herbicide, an antibiotic. But companies that make glyphosate herbicides still claim that it is safe for us to eat food grown with glyphosate. Let's look at what the research shows about glyphosate's effects on soil health and plant health to learn how it could be affecting our health. We have to go way back in time to the microbes because they were the first organisms on our planet. And as plants and animals evolved with microbes, they set up mutually beneficial or symbiotic relationships with these microbes to perform essential tasks for each other. The microbes that help plants are found in the soil around the plant roots. And this zone is called the rhizosphere. These microbes include bacteria and fungi, and they, together with the roots and the soil, are referred to as the soil microbiome. The soil microbiome has billions of microbes. In just 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, there are as many microbes as there are people on our planet. That's 7 billion microbes in a teaspoon of healthy soil. We all learned that a plant using the sun's energy converts carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil to make carbohydrates or sugars through the process of photosynthesis. The plant uses some of these carbohydrates, which contain the carbon for energy, but 30 to 70% of the carbohydrates that a plant produces are given off by its roots to the microbes in the soil. And this is illustrated on the right side of the slide as a symbiotic exchange of substances and communication between the plants and the microbes. So the microbes are getting sugars or carbon that they need from the plants. What are the plants getting in return? Let's consider just the fungi. This electron microscopic photo shows the fungal roots called hyphae. There are miles of these fungal hyphae in the rhizosphere. The hyphae greatly increase the root capacity of the plant. And incidentally, this is one of the reasons why tilling is bad for the soil. Tilling tears up the fungal hyphae. The plant depends on the hyphae to get its nutrients and water. The fungal hyphae give off enzymes that dissolve rock surfaces, and the enzymes bind with these minerals. And the hyphae make these minerals available to the plant. Minerals like calcium, phosphorus, zinc, sodium, and iron. The plant does its job of making carbohydrates available to the microbes, to the fungi, and in exchange, the fungi provide these essential nutrients to the plants and to us when we eat the plants. However, when glyphosate is sprayed on the plants, it makes its way out through the roots and into the soil. Since glyphosate is a chelator, when it gets into the soil, it latches onto these important minerals, making them unavailable to the plant, therefore unavailable to us. We expect to get these nutrients from the plants that we eat, but food that is grown with glyphosate is not as nutritious as food that is grown without glyphosate. And now, instead of 1 apple a day, we need many more to keep the doctor away. And there are many other things that microbes do for plants. Rhizobium bacteria are found in the nodules of pea and bean plants. And it's actually the bacteria that help to take nitrogen from the air for the plant. Other microbes help plants defend themselves from diseases and harmful insects. And still others aggregate or glue soil particles together to make pathways for better water penetration. And this helps plants during times of drought conditions. Microbes are necessary for healthy soil and healthy, nutritious plants. But remember the patent by Monsanto in 2010? Glyphosate is an antibiotic. It kills microbes. It destroys the soil microbiome. Fewer microbes means less healthy soil, less healthy plants, less healthy food. leading to animals and people that are not as healthy. So to summarize, glyphosate is a chelator, a caustic descaling agent. Glyphosate is an herbicide. It kills plants. And glyphosate is an antibiotic. It kills microorganisms in the soil. And there is increasing evidence that glyphosate disrupts the microbes in our bodies, which you will now hear about from Carl.
So Carol gave us an overview and Chris focused on the effect of glyphosate on soil. I'm going to focus on the effect on human health. So a quick biology lesson. Chris explained there were 7 billion microbes in a teaspoon of soil, but our body contains trillions of bacteria, and they're literally everywhere, on our skin, our eyes, inside all of our organs, especially the stomach, intestines, and colon that are collectively called the digestive tract. They estimate 40 trillion microbes inside our digestive tract. This is a depiction of the inside of an intestine. Those purple bulbish things are called villi, and they are the lining of the intestine, and they're actually only 1 cell thick. And all of those red, purple, green, yellow, etc., that you're looking at are microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, etc. I want to tell you how important the bacteria in our gut microbiome is. There was a study done with identical twins. One twin was obese, the other twin was thin. They took the bacteria from their intestines and put them in 2 related mice, same genetic composition. The mouse from the thin person stayed thin. The mouse that had the bacteria from the intestine of the obese person became obese. The mice were given the exact same diet, not just the type of food, but the quantity was identical. So that shows the effect of microorganisms that are in our intestine on our overall health. As Chris mentioned, we co-evolved with these microbes, and we have a symbiotic relationship with them. We feed them, they take care of us. They repair the intestinal lining. They produce vitamins and amino acids that are literally indispensable. We can't live without them. And the bacteria in our gut also instruct the thymus to produce T cells for our immunity. So you think about what we're going through now with COVID-19 and how important your immune system is. Glyphosate is an antibiotic. It kills bacteria. All bacteria. It doesn't focus on just harmful ones. Kills the good ones too. Our gut microbiome is affected by what we eat. If we eat foods containing glyphosate, we create an imbalance in our gut that's called dysbiosis. It's like the opposite of symbiosis. And dysbiosis is associated with many of our 21st century health problems. Children are especially vulnerable to glyphosate because their immune systems are not fully developed. Here's a partial list of chronic illnesses that are afflicting children right now. These were rarely seen before glyphosate came on the market. ADHD, asthma, obesity. And again, these are chronic issues, not like a cold that you get over. Food allergies, chronic headaches, irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, these were unheard of years ago. These health problems either didn't exist at all or only in a tiny percentage of the US population prior to 1974. One example, autism. You've been hearing much more about it now. This graph shows the red line is the amount of glyphosate used in the country, and the yellow bars are the numbers of 6-year-olds who were diagnosed with autism as part of the special ed process, the IDEA. is the Individual with Disability Education Act. So in 1974, before Roundup, 1 child in 5,000 had autism. 2020, it was 1 child in 54. And now, today, the current figure is 1 child in 35. Unbelievable. A woman named Michelle Perot is a pediatrician with 35 years experience. She and her co-author wrote a book that I highly recommend, What's Making Our Children Sick. They said in this book, we posit that the systemic health failures among our children, that previous slide I showed you, systemic health failures, are a result of something even more troubling than the symptoms in their bodies. But these health failures are the cumulative outcome of being born into and living in an environment that has been made toxic by agrochemical industrialized food production. Sorry, I don't know what's going on here. We have another little glitch. Bear with me here. This is what agrochemical industrialized food production looks like. It's genetically modified seed planted in basically inert or poisonous soil, and then fed artificial fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, so that they grow, and they're sprayed with pesticides of all sorts. And this is what we're eating. You saw this graph a little bit earlier, but it's frightening. The percentage of corn, cotton, soybeans, and many other crops that are now saturated with glyphosate. We are in the middle of a health crisis, and not coincidentally, our health crisis mirrors our climate and our environmental crisis. Here's a few graphs to pinpoint that. This is showing the correlation between glyphosate use and thyroid cancer. And you can see the green line on the bottom was the trend of thyroid cancer among the population prior to Roundup Ready seed. So it's just taken off astronomically after glyphosate can be applied because of these Roundup Ready seeds. This is a graph showing Parkinson's disease. Same thing. It was slightly increasing every year, but now it's gone off the charts. Bear with me here, folks. I have no idea why this is happening. This is a correlation between glyphosate and diabetes in the United States, which, as you probably know, is an epidemic. And again, this is a strong correlation between glyphosate and diabetes, even in children. Renal disease, or also called kidney failure, deaths, again, astronomical increase, and glyphosate has been affecting all of these areas. Medical research is finding links between pesticides, especially glyphosate, and all of these following diseases. You think anxiety is more of a mental health issue, but there is a correlation between anxiety and glyphosate. And as you remember about the microbes in our intestine, it has an effect on everything. So depression, migraines, autoimmune diseases. Again, this is an epidemic. Why are we here in this country having so many health problems? When we eat food grown conventionally, we're consuming glyphosate. The GMO seeds, the crops can be saturated with glyphosate. As Carol mentioned, wheat, oats, and potatoes do not need glyphosate to grow. They're sprayed on them after they're grown to make it more convenient to harvest. All the chicken, the beef, the pork that we eat, they are saturated with both antibiotics, which obviously passed on to us, and GMO seed and genetically modified seed allows more glyphosate. I'm not even going to go into the Franken crops that have become insecticides on their own. A little research to show why it's a bad idea to ingest glyphosate. Epidemiological evidence supports strong temporal correlations between glyphosate usage on crops and a multitude of cancers that are reaching epidemic proportions, including breast cancer, pancreatic, kidney, thyroid, liver, bladder cancer, and leukemia. And epidemiologists are also called disease detectives. These are the people that do studies to find out who is most likely to get affected and what can we do about it. 2019 study found that glyphosate, in combination with any other risk factor connected with breast cancer, induced tumor development in 50% of the mice. This study was significant because it doesn't just show correlation, it showed causation between glyphosate and cancer. Findings from experimental animal studies and meta-analysis of human epidemiological studies suggest a compelling link between exposures to GBH glyphosate-based herbicides, like Roundup, and increased risk for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a kind of cancer. This compelling link was so compelling that all 3 juries that have heard complaints against Monsanto and now Bayer, linking the people who use glyphosate to developing this lymphoma, all found for the plaintiffs against Monsanto. And think about that. This is a huge corporation that can hire the best lawyers in the world, and they lost all 3 times. As of December last year, there were 125,000 lawsuits against Monsanto and now Bayer. They're trying to settle these right now for billions and billions of dollars. Scary study, 2018, 93% of pregnant women had detectable levels of glyphosate in the urine. And the higher the level of glyphosate, the shorter the pregnancy. So gestation periods are shrinking. And it's not just women. Men are becoming impotent. They have fewer sperm in the semen, and they're less able to move, impregnate eggs. So this is becoming a problem mostly in the West, where glyphosate is in use. I mean, West meaning the US and Europe. In a very scary study, because I have grandchildren, you'll see why this is a very scary study. They gave mice a small amount of glyphosate. Those mice developed no symptoms. Their children, no exposure to glyphosate, no symptoms. But their grandchildren and great-grandchildren developed disease when they became adults. The conclusion of this study was that ancestral environmental exposures to toxicants like Roundup promote the epigenetic transgenerational inheritance of adult onset disease. And we're talking about prostate, kidney cancer, ovarian cancer, and birth defects. The obvious question you should be asking is, if glyphosate causes cancer, it kills beneficial bacteria in our gut microbiome, resulting in so many health problems. Why is it still legal? As an example of why, in 2015, the World Health Organization asked its study group, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, to look at the research and conclude whether glyphosate caused cancer. They said it did. However, it's not banned because the Environmental Protection Agency here says glyphosate is not carcinogenic to humans. So why the difference? The World Health Organization used studies that were peer-reviewed, which you probably know is the highest standard possible. Whereas the EPA used studies that were handed to them by Monsanto that mostly were not peer-reviewed. And so the EPA used those studies. And as Carol and I think Chris mentioned before, all of the studies were on glyphosate alone, not on Roundup with all of its so-called inert ingredients. If they studied those, the results would probably be different. The EPA asked for those studies, and Monsanto just said, no, not necessary, and the EPA caved. A woman named Carrie Gillum wrote a complete expose of why glyphosate is allowed in this country. And the answer, unfortunately, is it's based more on politics than science. So I'll leave you with this quote from Jane Goodall. How could we have ever believed that it was a good idea to grow our food with poisons? So we're going to share now a couple of ways for you to have an impact on this. And Carol will start off.
We can have an impact, and we can also try to take our own health into our own hands. And so some of the recommendations are, if possible, to buy as much as possible the organic food and local food, and to ask your grocery stores to stock more of it. The more we demand it, the more we would like it, the more we will be able to get it. We also should be supporting our local farmers and speaking with them and finding out what they use and how they farm, and can join them in CSAs. We can tell hardware stores, and we have written letters to them, and I think there have been results, to stop selling Roundup and those kinds of pesticides in their stores, to make it less available. And we can also, by writing to our legislators, support regenerative agriculture. Tell them to consider supporting farmers who are in transition to regenerative agriculture without the use of chemicals. So these are some of the suggestions. The very helpful website called Environmental Working Group does publish a list of foods that are most contaminated, and those are the ones called the dirty dozen, as you can see there, that you should try to buy organic. But there are also others that are the clean 15, they call them, that do not need to be organic. So it takes some research, and it takes some real understanding of what this all entails. So thanks. Chris, up to you.
So many of us have lawns, and we can change our lawns. A lot of the grass seed that is being used is very short rooted. And this means that it can't reach down very far into the soil to take up nutrients there or water. It needs a lot of fertilizer and a lot of water. So if you do have to reseed your lawn, try to buy a grass mix that contains grass seeds that have a variation in root depth. You can raise the blade on your lawnmower up to 3 to 4 inches. And by letting your grass plants grow taller, that will increase their photosynthesis capacity. It will put more carbon into the soil for the microbes that are there. And of course, sequester more carbon in that way. You should only use organic fertilizers like compost, and do not use pesticides. Let those dandelions grow. They are some of the first flowering plants that offer nectar to the early spring pollinators. And if you do mow your lawn so that it grows taller, you will begin to see additional flowers that you'll see flower buds popping up, and you can mow around them and let them grow. And you'll notice that they are providing food for a different group of bees. Of course, you can convert part of your lawn to a pollinator garden, or turn your whole lawn into a meadow. By doing that, you won't need a lawnmower or a weed whacker. You won't be using the fossil fuel that's involved. And you will be amazed by the biodiversity that will, of birds and insects that make it into your yard. Carl?
I just want to add, there's a great saying, the difference between a flower and a weed is a judgment. And I used to be one of those folks who liked my lawn about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and didn't want to see any dandelions. And now the middle picture is more like what most of our lawn is. And it also raised the blade. So it is possible to just change your mindset. So in terms of advocacy, especially if you have young children, talk to other parents, kids who go to your school, talk with your neighbors, and talk about this issue and find out whether they know anything about pesticides. And so you'll be able to educate them after this. Meet with their principals and the park and rec folks and find out what's being sprayed, and let your select board and other people know your position. Like, you don't want Roundup sprayed around anywhere where kids are going to have any contact. So we have had, as Carol mentioned, a couple of bills introduced that were not passed. So when that comes up again, call your local rep, your state senator, tell them you'd like these bills passed. And go on these websites. I'm going to go right now. These websites are incredibly helpful. Beyond Pesticides, the top one, is the one that made that chart that Carol showed with all of the different pesticides and what the harms are. And the second from the bottom, Environmental Working Group, that's the one that comes out with the dirty dozen things that you really, really need to buy organic. And then there are others that not as important. So jot down some of these, and especially Beyond Pesticides and the Environmental Working Group. NOFA is a great resource. That's NOFA is the Northeast Organic Farming Association. Great resource for a lot of things, including alternatives to glyphosate. So for more information, you can contact us anytime. Go to the Earth Matters page on Facebook, and Annie is taking care of that, and she'll relay any questions to Carol and Chris and I. And just type in that you saw this PowerPoint and you'd like to contact us. So we are now available to answer questions, and I will see if it's possible to stop sharing my screen.
If you have a question, you can put it into the chat. I'm going to be checking that. And I'm also going to send Mike some resources that when the recording goes out for general viewing, there will be information there that you can use to get more background on all of these different topics, including lawn care, the effect of glyphosate on pollinators. We've collected quite an assortment of material on it. We have these brochures that the NOFA Massachusetts group did, which is a very good way to get more people interested in advocating for growing food that is pesticide free. So anybody have any questions? I'm going to look in the chat. Nothing yet. Everybody, Mike, can you unmute everyone, or should everybody unmute themselves? Great. One thing I I realize that we don't really deal with this very much in our presentation, but in the beginning, Roundup labels all said biodegradable, and Monsanto was taken to court by the state of New York and by France because it's not true, and they had to remove that from their label. There's a discrepancy in the research. It's a very broad range of the half-life of glyphosate, but one of the metabolites that glyphosate breaks down into is much more toxic. It's called AMPA, and which stands for amino methyl phosphonic acid, and that has a half-life in the soil of between 119 and 958 days. So that certainly is not a biodegradable product. So someone is asking, do we know the status of what Bayer plans to do from here? Do they make enough money selling Roundup to continue to see the product given the liability costs?
Last I heard, they've offered somewhere around $11 billion. And there were a certain percentage of plaintiffs that are willing to go along with that and take it. I forget, maybe 90,000. There's still about 35 to 45,000 plaintiffs that said, no, it won't be enough when you divide it up. So it's still in the courts. It has not been decided. But just the fact that they're offering that kind of money tells you that they know they're going to lose if they go to court again. And Mike Bailey, I guess it might be, asked if there were tests to see the levels of glyphosate in our bodies. And Chris and I both did. You want to talk about that, Chris? You're muted.
I was typing. I didn't want to have that noise in there. Yes, all three of us had our urine tested, and we had it done through an organization called HRI Labs, and I'm putting that in the chat here. And we all had glyphosate in our urine. Carol had the least, and I think she must eat more organic food than we do.
Yeah.
They also offer tests for your pets, because of course pets that are running around on playing fields or on, along the roadsides where it's sprayed for weed control under power lines, any of those places are going to have glyphosate residues. And so a lot of people are interested in getting their pets tested also. And it also is partly because a lot of dog foods contain grains that were grown with glyphosate. So I think people are interested in that. So it's HRI Labs. It's a pretty easy website to use, and the results came back pretty quickly.
And since, as Carol mentioned, wheat is one of those products that they spray glyphosate on just before they harvest it. So you think about bread, pasta, cereals. I mean, again, if you do not get organic bread, cereal, etc., you are going to have glyphosate in those products. No question about it.
Yes, and having those tests done, which was very easy to do, will make you rethink your own diet, and it'll make you make better choices. So we found it very helpful to make those take those tests.
When we were doing research about glyphosate, we've been doing it for quite a while now. We discovered that there are various levels of glyphosate in water. And the EPA does very little to regulate or require municipalities to test the water for glyphosate. So I was rather astounded when I was looking up different pesticides on the EPA site of they're regulated chemicals, but they didn't require any monitoring. I was just shocked by that.
And as I mentioned about, why is it still legal? just to underscore the point, it's legal because of politics, not because of science. If the EPA looked at peer-reviewed studies, they'd be yanking glyphosate off the market. But the farmers and the agrochemical businesses that rely on these chemicals are very powerful. I mean, there are lobbyists literally every single day in every congressman's office. It's incredible, the political pressure that these people are under. And it's also, Carrie Gillam mentioned in her book, Whitewash, that the US Department of Agriculture, there are a lot of people in the farming industry that go in there and they pulled people from the USDA into the Environmental Protection Agency when it was formed in the 70s. So from the very beginning, there was kind of a slant in favor of agribusiness that does not seem to have abated. So we ordinary citizens need to make enough noise to counterbalance the lobbying.
Okay, I see that someone else is asking, do we remember how much the testing from HRI labs cost? I don't.
I
I
don't.
don't either.
But
Terribly expensive.
yeah, I typed into the chat that you can use a discount code, NOFA Mass. They put that right on the brochure they have here. So it is a little less expensive with that. Now, someone else is asking what crops or food does not include glyphosate. And the most recent thing we looked up was sweet corn. And we found that like less than 1% of sweet corn is grown with glyphosate. Most of the corn in this country is not consumed by humans directly. 40% is grown for cattle feed or animal feed, unfortunately. So if you're eating a lot of meat that comes from CAFO or concentrated
Agricultural feeding organizations.
Okay, thank you. Animal feeding, yeah. From inhumane feeding operations, then that does contain a lot of glyphosate. But 30% of the corn is grown for making ethanol, but very little sweet corn. So the best,
And don't forget corn syrup,
well, yes,
high fructose corn syrup.
yeah, that's true. A lot of food additives.
Very little corn is for human consumption. So, but the other answer to the question is, you've got to be eating organic food as the only way to guarantee you're not going to have glyphosate. And even more than that, like Carol said, buy local from your local farmers here in Vermont and ask them, what are you using? Using pesticides, and they'll answer you.
There's an organization, it's kind of a loose organization called the Vermont Pesticide Network, which has been paying attention to what happens in the state legislature around any of the pesticides. They include people from NOFA, Vermont, rural Vermont. There's a member of the Community Action Works who is like working with the organization. Sylvia Knight, who's done a lot of research and has advocated for banning a lot of pesticides. She's been doing that for about 30 years. And several people from the Vermont Law Foundation, who also are have a lot of expertise in presenting in front of the legislature. So if anything comes up, hopefully there will be advertising about that. They are not very much, nothing was done with any of the bills this year because of COVID. It was just not the time. There were too many other things for the legislature to focus on, I think. And so one of the legislators had submitted that bill in 2019, but she didn't resubmit it this year, knowing that it would not be taken up. But there are organizations in the state who are working to get some of these things banned or looked at more closely. Anybody else have any comments? There's no other questions in the chat. So,
I guess there was one question I was going to respond to privately about autism. You know, someone typed in privately to me that there's no evidence that any chemical causes autism, which is a developmental disorder. My last job was as a school psychologist for Addison Rutland School District, and I evaluated many kids for autism. So I'm very well acquainted with that as a developmental disorder. And while it's true, you know, that there hasn't been a direct link, you know, with a chemical, same with vaccine, there's no proof that vaccines cause it. The most current research that I've seen, including some by this doctor named Zach Bush, does show an extremely direct correlation between glyphosate and other pesticides and autism. And my understanding is, you think about that slide about the inside of the intestine and how vulnerable we are if we upset the balance of these 40 trillion bacteria in our gut microbiome. It affects so many things. It does not just affect our physical health, it affects mental health. That list of chronic problems I showed you include things like depression and anxiety. You know, again, how could that be connected to a physical chemical? Yet, if you introduce an antibiotic into your gut that is poisonous, it's a chelator, it's an herbicide and an antibiotic, it's going to have a huge effect. Just another example. Zach Bush also mentions there are roughly 150 different strains of bacteria in our gut microbiome. And he said research was showing if you eat a fast food diet, the number of strains goes down from 150 to around 20. So again, you think about that study I mentioned about obese man and the gut microbiome, the bacteria put into a mouse, that mouse became obese. There is a clear connection between what we're eating and not just physical, but mental health and developmental disorders like ADHD and autism. So yes, there is a correlation, in my opinion.
Someone, the same fellow who wondered about testing for glyphosate, says that when he went online to check out HRI test labs, he got Great Plains Laboratories. Do either of you have, Carol or Carl, have any papers about that? I can't find my information on the laboratory testing that I had done.
I probably do, but I don't have them right with me, but it's such a good question. We have to be prepared for that one.
Yes, and
it's very possible that we were in this laboratory in Kansas City. I think sort of a faint memory.
This is Dave Khanna. I asked the question and I just found out that I was wrong. I did not Google it properly. There is an HRI labs, and I am putting it, I just put the website up. So sorry about that.
Okay, great. That's good. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
My memory isn't that good.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Well,
Any other questions? Otherwise, we will say thank you to Mike Bailey for organizing Solar Fest, and to Steve Berry and group to sponsor us.
and thank all of you for attending. If you would like to suggest to an organization that you belong to, like a garden club church group, school, PTA, get in contact with us and we'd be happy to present.
Right.
So, and thank you for taking the time to spend with us tonight.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Yes.